So, newly minted vice presidential pick Tim Walz, who's the governor of Minnesota, is being put on blast for stolen valor and leaving his unit hanging when they got the order to deploy to Iraq. He declined to deploy with them. This is from an article that came out in the West Central Tribune in 2018, authored by people that served with Governor Tim Walz, that were putting him on blast for basically stolen valor and leaving his unit hanging. We, retired Command Sergeant Major of the Minnesota National Guard, feel it is our duty and responsibility to bring forth the truth as we know it concerning his service record. In early 2005, a warning order was issued to the 125th Field Artillery Battalion. The order was to prepare them to be mobilized for active duty at deployment to Iraq. When you are about to deploy, you generally have a couple of months' notice. On May 16, 2005, he quit, leaving the 125th Field Artillery Battalion and its soldiers hanging without its senior non-commissioned officer. His excuse was that he needed to retire in order to run for Congress. This is false. According to a DoD directive, he could have run and requested permission from the Secretary of Defense before entering active duty, as many reservists have.
Yeah.
Lars, good morning, sir. Lars on a little bit earlier than normal. We had him scheduled later. Got a little bit of a conflict, so I thank you for doing this, sir, and coming in a little bit early.
This is a bad situation for Tim Walz.
We're reliving the days of John Kerry on this one, aren't we?
Yep. John Kerry, and don't forget Dick Blumenthal, who said he was an active duty member in Vietnam, served in Vietnam, and that turned out to be a big fat lie.
Well, there are consequences of lying like that, not that he'll see anything. And the other one that's even probably worse than that one was this statement.
We can make sure we don't have reciprocal carry among states, and we can make sure that those weapons of war that I carried in war is the only place where those weapons are at.
Wow. How do you judge that one, Lars?
Well, the fact is, and one other detail to add to the Tim Walz story, he did take a deployment prior to getting the orders for Iraq, except that deployment was to Italy, which sounds like actually probably a pretty sweet assignment all in all. His unit went over there to be backup for others, but it was Italy. No bullets flying, no carrying weapons in war. So he's using all this language to sell the anti-gun message that Democrats usually sell. And then somebody says, hold on, you've never actually been deployed. And then he starts going after J.D. Vance. And Vance says, at least when my country asked me to go to Iraq, I went to Iraq. Tim Walz got his orders to go to Iraq and quit early. And I'm not even sure how he did that, because by his accounting, he signed up on September the 18th, the week after the 9/11 terrorist attacks. He had been in the National Guard for 20 years before. He came back in, re-enlisted for either 6 years, that's what the records say, or 4 years, which is his version. But even if it was 4 years, in May of 2005, he wasn't done with his 4-year hitch, and he certainly wasn't done with his 6-year hitch. And he had gone to Command Sergeant Major Academy with the agreement that he would fulfill his obligations and he would become a Command Sergeant Major. And today, on the governor's website in Minnesota, it says that he was a retired Command Sergeant Major. He was not. The Army National Guard says he was demoted back to Staff Sergeant because he never achieved that rank, because he quit when he got his deployment orders. All of that does not sound good.
Well, he's also got he's playing with words in here also, because he says, I was deployed to overseas. I did go overseas. And
well, he went to Italy.
There. But he doesn't let you know that. He said, I was there to support the battle going on in Afghanistan. And if you don't listen to that carefully in some of the speeches that he gave, you would think he was there. He was directing those supply operations, as you said, from Italy.
And by the way, Paul, my mom and dad served in the Navy. I was never in uniform. I did not go in. I really thought about it, but it was the 70s, and I was just going to move on with my career. There was nothing going on in the world. In fact, I figure the 4 years I missed by not going in 77, I would have missed Grenada. It was the biggest conflict that went on during that time. But Having said that, over the years, I've talked to so many vets. It's very important to them that you do not inflate your resume. That is stolen valor. In fact, do you remember the admiral who was identified because he was wearing a Vietnam campaign ribbon, but he had the V for Valor, they call it a V for Valor device on the ribbon.
Right.
And what it meant was you had served in a place where you were under fire. Well, he was serving offshore on a ship, and so he didn't deserve that V for Valor device. When it was finally pointed out, and he was a high-ranking guy back at the Pentagon, he went home and he put a bullet in his head. Now, that's not the way it should have ended, but that's the amount of shame that it brought on him that he was called out. And there are groups, Terrence Hoey runs one of them, that go and identify people engaging in stolen valor, either claiming they've been in the military when they have not, or claiming ranks they didn't earn. And now it appears that Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, Kamala Harris's running mate, is a perpetrator of stolen valor, and he needs to explain that.
Yeah. That's just one of the things, too. But it's typical of families like that. It reminds me a lot of Joe Biden's family. His wife is about as wacky as he is. Gwen Walz.
Having a chance every day. How many chances do you get? My answer to that is as many chances as you need, which doesn't really please those law and order people.
She's an advocate for the prisons and the prisoners, a hell of a lot more than she is for Christians and conservatives. But she works in the prison there. One of the things she does, she's an advocate. And she was basically asked, well, wait a minute, this guy's a champion of recidivism. He's a repeat offender over and over. How many chances do you give these people before they're out there killing and stealing again?
Having a chance every day. How many chances do you get? My answer to that is as many chances as you need, which doesn't really please those law and order people.
And I don't even want to get started as his daughter, but his daughter is just as bad.
Well, and think about this. When somebody has committed a violent crime and you don't give them another chance, you say you're getting punishment and we hope to dissuade you. Your chance is when you take your punishment and then say, now I'll go out and be on the straight and narrow. Paul, I get calls almost every week when the various topics come up from listeners who say, look, I committed a felony back in my 20s. I admit that I did the crime. I did my time. I came out. I've been straight ever since. And I congratulate them. That is your second chance. Your second chance is, oh, you've raped one woman, so we're going to let you go. So you can go rape 2 or 3 more because we're going to give you, as Mrs. Walz says, as many chances as you need. Well, how many chances do you need if you're a violent criminal, a rapist, a murderer, a child molester? I don't think you get any more chances.
Have you seen on social media, you kind of gauge this on all the different platforms, but you got to believe that the African-American community is probably where they were for Donald Trump. He's probably lost some of that with this ticket. But I just don't think he's lost a lot of it. And I could be wrong, and it really doesn't matter because whatever it is, actually, it's going to change between now and November. But your thoughts on that?
Well, Paul, I want to point something out to you. The thing that got the mainstream media all wrapped around their own axle about a week ago was when Trump went before the National Association of Black Journalists.
Yes.
And I think organizations like that should not exist because I don't belong to any groups that are based on race. I don't belong to any groups that say you can only be a member if you're black, or that we only or white. We're only going to advocate for you if you're white. But he goes before this group, and he did something rather bold, which I think was ask a question a lot of people have been asking, which is, for 3.5 years, all we heard was Kamala Harris is the first Indian American vice president, and they hammered that home. CNN did a whole segment on it. I mean, they talked about her being this way. She heralded herself that way. Joe Biden called her the first Indian American. And then all of a sudden, when you're heading up to an election, and the Democrats have lost a lot of Black American voters, according to the polls, Black Americans are saying, I'm not voting for this guy. He hasn't done anything for me. And his prior boss, Obama, didn't do anything for me either. I'm voting for Trump. And they become scared. And all of a sudden, the media and Kamala Harris say, she's not Indian American, she's black. And I know people are going to say, well, she can be both. Okay, she can be both. But why is it that when it was convenient to say she's the first South Asian Indian American vice president, they did that for 3.5 years. But when it's convenient for election, all of a sudden she identifies as black. That should be asked. And the media said, no, you can't ask that question. Well, baloney.
Got a break coming up. I think one of the greatest travesties that we've had in American history is that black history is not taught the way it actually happened. It's taught to benefit the Democrat Party. They wrote the books. And an example of that when we come back. Can you stick another segment?
Absolutely, Paul.
Got it. Lars Larson back with more coming up next. To go back, Lars Larson's my guest. To go back and talk about where we were prior to the New Deal, the Great Society, and you see this over and over. But if you go back to the history books that are being taught today, this is kind of like just wiped it out. It's not there.
There were about 3,700 free blacks who owned 12,000 black slaves. The question is, do the descendants of those free blacks who owned black slaves, do they pay? Blacks really benefited more the first 100 years after slavery we have in the last 50 years. I was
that
born
Bob
in
Woodson?
1937 during the Depression. Everyone in my small, low-income black community, 98% of the households had a man and a woman raising children. Elderly people could walk safely in that community without fear of being assaulted by their grandchildren. Never heard a gunfire during that time. Never heard of a child being shot to death in the crib. But there are 50 children today who have been shot and killed in our cities. You're talking about remedies. We've got to look beyond saying that every solution has to have a winner and a loser, that blacks can only benefit if whites lose. We have to be defined more than just victims of oppression.
I swear, and I say this over and over, if I had a magic wand, I would start a GOP Black Caucus, and I mean in the state of Mississippi, I should say, and hopefully it would flourish, because it would be a wonderful thing to change this dynamics.
Can you imagine? That's Bob Woodson, isn't it, from the Woodson Center?
I think it is, yeah.
Yeah, because the guy's brilliant, and he's been a great civil rights leader. We've had the pleasure to talk to him any number of times. But he points out, until the evil, racist Lyndon Johnson signed, put together a great society, said we're going to give everybody a check. What they did was they busted up intact black families, and the demographic numbers show it. We had intact black families in a black community prior to that. After that, the government said, oh, you're pregnant, you're going to have a baby, don't marry the guy and we'll send you a check. Marry the guy, you get no check. Which way do you think people went?
Lars, I have my brother-in-law retired years ago as with the post office. And one of his routes was in the Mississippi Delta, later in the Delta that went up to the hills in Mississippi. We would have conversations on the amount of money that he would be putting in these mailboxes, all of them with 4, 5, 6 kids, no daddy in the house. And it was a money-making project. Basically, that was the way that they survived. And all of these programs that they put on there, when we hear somebody say, the Democrats moved them from the plantation to the master's plantation to the social plantation, that's right on.
Well, that is. And the Democrats have always pretended to be the best friends that black Americans have, and they haven't been. I mean, I call them the party of slavery since 1829. And they say, oh, no, that's the old Democrat Party. The new Democrat Party. You mean the new Democrat Party like Lyndon Johnson? I can't say the full quote for you, but in one of the books written about Lyndon Johnson when he was president, he said, if we sign this welfare bill, the bill that was going to put a check in the pocket of every woman who didn't get married after she got pregnant, we'll have the N-words voting for us for the next 100 years. He said that. It was ugly, but he's a Democrat, but that was his view.
That was not in the movie with Woody Harrelson, though.
No, it wasn't. Hollywood left that out.
Oh, God. Have you ever watched that movie, LBJ, with Woody Harrelson?
I haven't. Harrelson's a nut, but he does a good job.
Yes. He does a great job. But they make LBJ look like a saint.
And he wasn't at all.
Oh, no. No. No, he was forced, dragging, screaming to get that bill done, and he had no choice.
By the way, can I mention something?
Yeah.
I got sick of the Olympics a while ago, but this latest Olympics just really bugged me. But this ties back to what we're talking about. One of the great heroes of the Democrat Party is FDR. I don't think much of FDR for a whole bunch of reasons, but among them is this. Who was it that showed up Hitler at the Olympics? That would have been Jesse Owens. And
yes,
Hitler, according to Owens, at least spoke to him. You know, they weren't necessarily friendly, and he didn't like him, you know, because Hitler believed in an Aryan race and all that nonsense. But Owens, you know, put him where he belonged until the U.S. put Hitler where he belonged. But when he came back to America, you know who didn't get invited to the White House to congratulate him for achieving the great feats that he did on track and for putting Hitler in his place? That would be the Democrats' big hero, FDR.
The Tim Walz also needs to be pointed out, not only as far as the military thing, but this guy is so liberal. He just basically says if a baby is 2 minutes away from being born, a mother can decide to terminate and execute that baby. And he's
Paul, can I tell you where it gets worse than that? Because Minnesota collects abortion statistics. And one of the statistics from an official report during Tim Walz's tenure, I think this is from 2022, is that occasionally an abortion is attempted, but the baby is born alive, even though the doctor and the patient intended that the baby die.
Yes.
Do you know what they do with that baby in Tim Walz, Minnesota? They set the baby aside and they let it die. And that happened at least 6 times. Now, he doesn't just believe in abortion up to the moment of birth. He believes that if a baby is accidentally born alive after an abortion, that you just set it aside like you put it out in the woods for animals. You just set it aside until it expires.
I was reading this, Governor Tim Walz, on his watch, at least 8 babies that I have here were born alive during botched abortions. All 8 of them died.
Okay, you have the right number.
Received any care. None of them received any of the care to save their lives. Most of them didn't receive basic comfort care either, not even making them comfortable. These little baby boys and girls, they were treated like garbage, then they were thrown away. For Walz, it wasn't the dead babies that was the problem, it was the reporting part. So Walz had the law changed to eliminate any reporting requirements for botched abortions and make it so doctors and nurses were no longer required to provide care for born alive infants. We heard this with the Virginia governor, but this is kind of new stuff as the governor of Minnesota.
Let me take you back in history to Illinois and State Senator Barack Hussein Obama. There was a bill in Illinois that would have said if a baby is born alive, even though you intended an abortion, that baby will be provided with all medical care to save its life. The only senator who stood up to say no, and he stood up and he vociferously argued against saving those babies, was the state senator Barack Hussein Obama.
Yeah. I'll never forget it. Just hits a flashback with me because I've got it in the database here, and I put a rooster crowing 3 times on the Chicago Convention when they denied Christ for 3 times, and I think it all went downhill from there.
Yep.
Not that it was already going, but it was going downhill from there. Your final thoughts?
We can bring this country back.
Visit? I think so. Lars, I thank you, sir. I know you've got a couple of other interviews to do, and we always appreciate it as we do your program nightly at 6 p.m. Thank you, man.
Paul Galloway, it is always my pleasure. Take care.
Thank you, partner. Appreciate it.